And David was prudent and faithful, and it was evident that the blessing of God was with him. And Saul at times realized his own unfitness for the government of Israel. And he felt that the kingdom would be more secure if there could be connected with him one who received instructions from the Lord. So Saul hoped also that his connection with David would be a safeguard to himself, since David was favored and shielded by the Lord. His presence might be a protection to Saul when he went out with him to war. Okay, now let's go look at the 22nd, the 20th verse. And let's look at some verses in this. Let's go to Judges 7:22. And that's in the Old Testament, Judges 7:22. Judges 7:22. Okay. Judges 7:22 says, when the 300 blew the trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp, and the army fled to Beth Achaia, towards the Zerath, as far as the border of Abel Meholah by Tabith. Now, look at what it said. When the 300 blew the trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his companion. So against each other. Wow. Wow. And we're going to look at one more verse. And we're talking about the 20th. Okay? Now remember, now we're talking about that verse when it says, now Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, and they told Saul, and the things pleased him. So Saul said, I will give her to him, that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him, against David. And therefore Saul said to David a second time, you shall be my son-in-law today. Now remember that. So let's look at 2 Samuel 21:8. 2 Samuel 21:8. And it says, so the king took Amoronite and Mephibosheth, the two sons of the Rizpah, the daughter of Ai, whom she bore to Saul, and the 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul, whom she brought up for Adriel, the son of Bezerah, and the Mahalite. Now you remember that the Adriel was supposed to be given to David. David had a thing for her. He kind of loved her, I believe. But Michal looks like she ended up raising her sister's kids. So look at how stuff turns around. So we go back to 1 Samuel 18, and we'll go back to 22, verse 22. And remember that verse 22, 1 Samuel 18, because I'm in another one. 1 Samuel 18 and 22. I hope I didn't say it different. And so I read about that, about what, and Saul commanded his servants communicate with David secretly and say, look, the king has delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now therefore become the king's son-in-law. So already Saul's setting David up. Now let's go to the 25th verse. Then Saul said, Thus you shall say to David, the king does not desire any dowry, but 104 foreskins of the Philistines, to take vengeance on the king's enemies. And the foreskins is the scrotum, the part of a man's his testicles. So he's saying foreskins. So go give me 100 foreskins of the Philistines to take vengeance on the king's enemies. But Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. 26. So when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to become the king's son-in-law. Now the days had not expired. Now let's look at verse 25 of what Saul said. Let's look at some other scriptures on that. Let's look at 1 Samuel. We already looked at that. Let's look at Genesis 34:12. And that's the very first book of the Bible, so you should be able to get there. What did I just say? I have to go back and look at it. I'm not sure which scripture I said. Sorry, you guys. 1 Samuel 18. And we're at 25. And it's not, I'm sorry, you guys, this thing just don't want to work with me today. It's 18:25, and the scripture I was wanting to look for is Genesis 34:12. And I think I'll get it this time, you guys. 34:12, Genesis 34:12. 34 and 12. That's why you need assistance sometime. And here's what Genesis 34:12 says. Ask me ever so much dowry and gift, and I will give according to what you say to me, but give me the young woman as a wife. So they had, back in that day, you had to give a certain dowry and gift, and they may do that in other countries, but and probably even here, a dowry and a gift before you could ask the woman for her hand as a wife. And so that's in Genesis. And so what Saul asked for was quite unusual. Wouldn't y'all say so? Foreskins, okay. And so in verse 27, he says, therefore David arose and went and his men and killed 200 men of the Philistines. And David brought their foreskins and they gave them in full count to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, as a wife. All right, y'all, I'm through. He asked for 100. David brought 200. So listen to the 28th verse. On the 27th. And therefore David arose and went and his men and killed 200. So in the 28th verse, it says, thus Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was still more afraid of David. So Saul became David's enemy continually. Then the princes of the Philistines went out to war, and so it was, whenever they went out, that David behaved more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that the name became highly esteemed. Now let's look at some verses on verse 30. On 18 and 30. And let's look at 2 Samuel 3:14. Second Samuel 3:14. So David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, give me my wife, Michal, whom I betrothed to myself for 100 foreskins of the Philistines. And listen to what happened, you guys. And Ishabeth sent and took her from her husband, from Petel, the son of Lish. Then her husband went along with her to Barim, weeping behind her. So Abner said to him, "Go, return." And he returned. So listen to this story. She already had one husband, but then they gave the Michal, David, as his wife. So let's listen to this. David went out whithersoever Saul told him to go, and behaved himself wisely, and Saul sent him over the men of war. David was prudent and faithful, and it was evident that the blessing of God was with him. Now it was the providence of God that had connected David with Saul. David's position at court would give him a knowledge of affairs in preparation for his future greatness. It would enable him to gain the confidence of the nation. And the vicissitudes and hardship which befell him through the enmity of Saul would lead him to feel his dependence upon God and to put his whole trust in him. And the friendship of Jonathan for David was also God's providence to preserve the life of the future rule of Israel. In all these things, God was working out his gracious purpose, both for David and for the people of Israel. This story just really proves, and it should prove to all of us who are people of God, that no matter what people do, no matter what they say, how they act, when God has a plan, a divine plan of protection, purpose for someone's life, no matter what you do, anybody does, even your own self, when God has a plan, no one can interrupt it. I mean, as it said, his gracious purpose both for David and for the people of Israel. So it wasn't just for David. A lot of anything that we're doing, anything that God does through us, is not just for you. It's not for you. It's for someone else. And it may be for many people. Look, David's kingship was for the people of Israel. It wasn't for him. It was also for David and for the people of Israel. And Saul, however, did not long remain friendly to David. When Saul and David were returning from battle with the Philistines, the woman came out of all cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet King David Saul. Remember I said with tambourines, with joy, and with instruments of music. One company sang, "Saul had slain his thousands," while another company took up the strains and responded and said, "And David has his 10,000s." The demon of jealousy entered the heart of the king, which was Saul. He was angry because David was exalted above himself in the song of the women of Israel. In place of subduing these envious feelings, he displayed the weakness of his character and exclaimed, "They have ascribed unto David 10,000, and to me they have ascribed but 1,000. And what can he have more but the kingdom?" So he was already jealous, envious, and he was looking at what the people were saying instead of what maybe God was thinking about him. And I'm praying that we, when given something, God is trying to before we get into certain positions,